our event this evening, and I am delighted to welcome our guests, Masha Rumer in conversation with Lara Vapnyar. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. If you would like to have closed captioning for this event, please look at the bottom of your screen and click on live transcript and then select show subtitle. Please do note that Parenting with an Accent books are delayed due to supply chain issues beyond our control. Books will be pre-ordered for this event and available for pickup and or shipping on or around November 30th. If you have questions for our guests, you can click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add one there. At the end of the presentation, our guests will have time to answer some of your questions. You can also upvote the questions you like and want most answered. Now on to the event that you're waiting for. Masha Rumer is an award-winning journalist and freelance writer. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Quartz, the Moscow Times, Parents.com, SFWeekly, and elsewhere. Parenting with an Accent is her first book. She lives with her family in California. Lara Vapnyar is the author of the acclaimed novels Memoirs of a Muse, The Scent of Pine, Still Here, and Divide Me by Zero, as well as two collections of short stories, There Are Jews in My House and Broccoli and Other Tales of Food and Love. She is a recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship and the Goldberg Prize for Jewish Fiction. Her stories and essays have appeared in the New Yorker, New York Times, Harper's, and the New Republic. She came to the US from Russia in 1994. And now it is my pleasure to turn the event over to them.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Lara. It's so great to see you here.
And it's great to have this reunion with you, Masha. I can just tell, can I tell how we met?
Of course. I also had some stories, but that would be wonderful.
So we met, was it 20 years ago?
Almost 20, which is surprising considering we're just 30 years old.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so for me, it's been very exciting to follow Masha's career because when we met, Masha was this young, vibrant woman. She still is, definitely, and just like starting her adult life. And I was married, and I had two children, and also Masha was slightly more American than I was. I mean, Parenting with an Accent, I here represent an accent, and Masha here represents parenting. So it was a lot of fun for me to fantasize how my life would have, and my career would have happened if I came here as a teenager like Masha. And it's been a lot of fun following Masha's career, and I'm so happy with Masha's success and with this wonderful, wonderful book. So, one thing about this book, I think if I had this book years ago when my children were still young, it would have helped me a lot. It would have saved me from making so many mistakes, and my children would have been happier adults for that.
Lara, thank you so much. I'm getting emotional. This book did not save me from making any mistakes. I'm afraid I still make them, but I'm just so honored that you agreed to participate with me. We've met, yes, almost 20 years ago. And some of my first memories after moving to New York as a young adult was being with you at the Graduate Center at the City University of New York, studying some really amazing texts, literary texts of bilingual authors. And at the same time, writing some really intense notes to each other and passing them in secret so the professor wouldn't notice, which I think was also a really great learning experience. You know, we were sort of living the life of books, but at the same time, I was learning a lot about you, and you were listening to the various things happening with me. And I was also, in particular, just really honored to know you, not just, you know, as a friend for so long, but also as somebody whose career I was just so excited to see taking off. I think at that point, you just started publishing in the New Yorker. I don't remember. I think you had your book already in progress, your collection. I'm not sure. Or I think it was just about to be out.
Starting then, yeah, but something was happening.
And it was really, really exciting. I remember just every time the book would come out, I'd be like, Lara's new book is out. And I was really honored to see it. And of course, I just really love your writing. You've already been introduced, right? But you've written 4 novels, 2 collections since we've met. Your writing focuses on relationships, families, romantic relationships, identity, and just surviving as an immigrant in this country. And the effect that it has, that immigration has on people and our self-identity and our relationships and beliefs when we move. And I just really love the characterizations and descriptions in all of your writing. One of my favorite things that you've written, I think, is probably Lydia's Grove from your collection. There are Jews in my house. It's a short story, which is just so sumptuous with the descriptions and details. I taught it for a number of years to my undergraduates. So I really recommend for anybody who hasn't read it yet in the collection, There are Jews in my house, to check it out. So I just wanted to mention that. And one other thing I'll say is I've also been really grateful for your support of my writing and my various multiple career detours. So thank you for that.
Thank you. So let's talk about this difficult thing of being an immigrant parent. But before we talk about that, I've been thinking a lot about my experience and my friend's experience when I read this wonderful book. And I think before we start talking about immigrants as parents, we need to talk about immigrants as children of their parents. Because I realized that we carry a lot of weight, a lot of expectations from our parents. So it's like that. They made enormous sacrifice of bringing us here. And I came here actually as an adult, but I came here with my mother, and she used to remind me about the sacrifice in subtle or not so subtle ways. And so we have enormous expectations. And the expectations are completely contradictory. Expectation number 1, we have to achieve enormous success as Americans. We have to be fully integrated in American society. We have to be accepted as Americans by other Americans. So if we don't do this, if we don't succeed at that, our parents sacrificed for nothing.
We have to be more American than other Americans. Yes.
Yes, that's important. And definitely more American than our children of immigrants, because they compare.
Yeah.
And then there is a second expectation. We have to remain fully Russian, because if we don't, we betray our roots, we betray great traditions of Russian culture, Russian literature, and all that. So it's 2 expectations, completely contradictory. Hard enough to survive if you're just a person. But if you also happen to be a parent, it's expected from you that you parent your children as a successful American, and at the same time you instill in them all the traditions of your old country. They have to be fluent in Russian language, and they have to know who Pushkin is. And by the way, Masha, do your kids know who Pushkin is?
They do.
Oh my God.
A little bit, yeah, but they could do better at knowing who Pushkin is. It's not, they don't know it enough,
I definitely don't know it enough. Okay, and so I guess this was what inspired you to write this book, like finding yourself in this difficult situation and then realizing that a lot of parents, young American parents, were in the same situation, because a lot of Americans come from all kinds of diverse backgrounds and heritage. And some of them come from all kinds of foreign countries and bring it all with them, the old culture and expectations by the parents. So I think this was your impulse, but I think it would be better if you tell this yourself. What was your impulse to write this?
Of course, I'd be happy to. That's such a great question that I think is just so universal. And by the way, I want to make sure we have enough for me to ask you questions about your writing and your journey as well. But you're absolutely right. On the one hand, you're expected to be this American kid who understands and completely integrates into all of the traditions. But at the same time, you know, if you do not have like 20 hours of extracurricular activities after school and you're not fluent in Russian, you're just, the sacrifices of our parents and grandparents were for nothing. Somebody is certainly rolling in their grave. I had a friend tell me that,
all the time.
Rolling, like if you listen, and then definitely
that's all they do. We roll and roll and roll.
And I think it's kind of across all kinds of cultures, you know, no matter where you're from. It doesn't just have to be Russian speakers, of course, Russian speakers who are Jewish. It's across the board. I had a friend who told me that, who is our age. She said that her mother told her that if she did not learn to make gefilte fish, nobody would ever marry her. But she did get married, just not to Russian or to a Jew, and they're happily married. So even though she buys, you know, the Manischewitz brand, and they were doing okay for themselves, right? But my motivation was, yes, of course, I came here as a teenager, but at the same time, and of course, I had my, you know, culture shock. It kind of lasted maybe a little longer than for some other kids who kind of reinvented themselves pretty quickly. I decided I wanted to be a writer and then take my time and try to process the American culture a little longer. But when I had children, I realized that I had so many questions that suddenly popped up. It was like a culture shock all over again, especially because my husband is American and not from a Jewish culture. He was brought up Christian. And so all these questions suddenly came up, you know, which of those two sides, how do I balance those two opposing sides? At the same time, there were all these, you know, what do I do? Like, do I feed my children water when they are, you know, hungry, or do I just, is water not allowed? Or am I supposed to eat like a lot of fatty foods to make sure that the baby doesn't starve? Or is the milk too thin? Like my parents always were afraid. Or is it okay if I just feed them formula, right? And a lot of those questions always came up. And socially also, it was a little bit strange because the women that were around me and the dads as well, they followed a certain types of socialization patterns and beliefs. And I suddenly realized that I had very little knowledge of what that's like. I didn't know what American cartoons were for the most part, aside from a few Disney shows, right? Because it's not what I grew up with. And I missed those references. And I suddenly really missed home being in this point, Russia, even though I haven't lived there for the vast majority of my life. So that's kind of, and I kept hearing those very same conversations everywhere around me from other immigrants, that they were kind of confused, feeling lonely, alienated, weird. And the more I thought about it, the more I wrote about it. And one article led to another, and then I realized it has to be a book. I never planned to write a book about this until my husband got me a Valentine's Day present, actually, to do something very, very unusual and exciting, which is to take a course on a proposal writing at our local writing center in San Francisco. That day, actually, I was invited to a birthday party with these inflatables where kids like eat tons of pizza and then they jump on these inflatable slides, which is really fun. You get to catch up with people, eat lots of pizza and cake. So I was like, I can't do this. This is my fun now as a new parent. I have to go to the inflatables birthday party. My husband said, no, I will take the children. You go to this class. So of course, feeling lots of guilt on top of my usual guilt, I went. And when I came back, I had this idea of the book in mind. And I pretty much sat down and mapped out the main chapters at night. And then they just kind of morphed into further chapters. But that's how the idea came about.
Okay, so you cover a lot of very interesting subjects in this book, and I was really interested in your approach to raising specifically bilingual children, because in your family, it's, I think, even more important than in mine. The father of my children is also Russian and Jewish. So in your family, it would be even more challenging to get it just right. Do you think you got it more or less right, like your approach to bringing up bilingual children?
That is such a great question. I don't think I'll ever get it right, to be honest. But at one point, the really liberating thing, actually, when I had told this to other parents, even like a Chinese-born mom, she's like, "So what is the answer? How do you do it?
Yeah,
I know you're writing a book about this. Please tell me the recipe."
Yes.
Like, I have no clue. I think I might be screwing up my kids just like any other parent. But the point is that the goal for the book was just to say, we're really just doing the best that we can. And every family is unique, not just, but their language surroundings. Like it might be, like, for example, if two parents in a 2-person family speak their native language at home exclusively, there is, say, like a 75% chance that the child will be bilingual, right? According to the study in Belgium that was conducted by this professor, Annick de Houwer. But what about the other 25%? What if, our partner does not speak our language? Or what if we mix languages at home, which is so often what happens? Then it's tricky. I don't think I got it right, but I think the only thing is I'm doing the best that I can and kind of learning along the way and trying to traumatize my kids as little as possible. But of course, my goal is to try to present to them both cultures. And the tricky part is, right, making sure they don't feel left out and weird compared to their peers, and they know who all these superheroes are, right? And at the same time, they know at least a little bit of Pushkin is, and they speak the language. And I don't always get compared by, my relatives, even if they don't say it, like so-and-so speaks Russian so much better. Look, or, their extracurriculars are better, like, or they're going to go to Harvard. What about yours? Mine are only 5 and 8. But, a lot of people start thinking about it before the kids are born. Probably not me, which is probably my failure already. So that's, what about you? How do you feel, Lara, about, in terms of the cultural balance? I think both of your kids were born here, but they grew up, surrounded by your culture. So how do you feel about the whole balance of cultures?
But in my case, I think it was easier in some ways because my mother lived with us. I mean, easier for Russian language for the children. In that terms, it was easier. In other matters, it was much, much harder. But she lived with us. When we immigrated, she was only 57. She was at the height of her career in Moscow. Here, she had nothing, no friends, nothing to do. And she was really, really unhappy. It was horrible just to look at her and to see how much she lost. So for her, bringing up my kids became her whole life. And I struggled with this. I thought, am I giving her like too much of what I'm supposed to do? Like, am I like letting her be the mother of my children instead of me? And I've at one hand, I felt very sorry for her. I couldn't be hard with her. I couldn't say, no, these are my children. I make all the decision. And on the other side, I felt selfishly relieved because she would relieve me of a lot of unpleasant and hard chores of motherhood. She would do it herself. And so as I see it now, it was not a very healthy situation. Like, you shouldn't do that. You should be the main person in your children's lives, no matter what. It was when my children were growing up and we all lived in this house with my mother. Sometimes I felt like their sibling. And when my mother was dying and she was confused by the end of her life, she thought we were her 3 children. I was the oldest child and the worst behaving, nasty kid, and my kids were her good children. So I think my main mistake was letting her do that. But looking back at it, I probably wasn't able to change anything. But since she spent so much time with them, and since she loved it so much, and she was she has been a teacher for many years, and then she was a professor, and she wrote several books on how to teach children. So she taught them a lot. She taught them Russian. She taught them about Russian culture, about Russian literature. Basically, all that they know about Russian culture is what she gave him, not me. It will sound horrible, but I assumed my full motherly duty after I was divorced and after my mother died. And then my kids were teenagers. And it was a little bit too late, and it was really difficult. But I think I finally got it right. But it was a struggle.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Lara. And it's first of all, what you mentioned reminds me of the protagonist from your latest novel. Here, I'm going to show this, Divide Me by Zero. I really love this book. And I think you even mentioned that some parts are maybe more autobiographical than others in one of the interviews. So it's beautifully and if painfully rendered, the scenes of the three siblings towards the end. But I think I think that this definitely. I think looking back, it's always so easy to think, oh, I could have done this differently. But at the same time, even just with language, right? If they had that exposure to culture and language that really affected them, your kids for the rest of their lives, and it provided that framework. It's possible to become bilingual at any age, even though later there may be fewer opportunities to practice, or you might have an accent. But at the same time, hearing that the sounds of the language and being exposed to it from the very beginning really just puts the roots and the foundational knowledge and the passion for a culture. So it sounds like everything worked out really well in that case. All right. Even if the relationships were shifting. But I understand what you mean. I've had people also ask me, what are some things from your culture that you do differently, or your parents do differently? And sometimes I couldn't have an answer right away, even though I was writing a book about it or I just started, because some of these questions are just, it's almost like an unconscious thing that we do and we don't realize it until we really start reflecting on it. I found that the interviews I conducted for the book, which is a little over 60, some of them are with experts and the majority of with adults, most of them are parents, but not everybody interviewed is actually not everybody's a parent, and not even, in fact, everybody's partnered of the people I interviewed. Some of the questions I would ask about, what do you hope for your children, or any, regrets, or who do you even socialize with, or tell me about your acculturation process, or they'd be more specific. A lot of people simply just did not know what to say. Sometimes a partner, if the partner was there, would answer for them. Other times they would just improvise on the spot, and oftentimes I would get a call back or a message or an email saying, I've been thinking about this for a few days, and this is actually what is really happening. Even people who are really introspective who are answering these questions. I just find that we have, as immigrants, so much so many things that are unanalyzed, and
yes,
right, we could just we don't even realize what's happening.
And one of my favorite chapters in your book was the chapter about your kids resisting your bilingual efforts, because even if you get it 100% right, even if you had a scientifically proved system of bringing up bilingual children, what if children just don't want to do it? Because children are their own people, and parents often forget about that, but they have distinct personalities, and then it's really hard to tell whether you should persevere and push certain things on your children, or whether you have to follow their lead and let them develop how like their intuition tells them. So I mean, it's a very hard question, but do you think writing this book helped you somehow with your parents and help you? Maybe
Absolutely.
made you saw certain things that surprised you in some ways?
Absolutely. I think writing this book and kind of doing the research for it before it even became the, the official book, I think it just kind of really made me chill out a little bit, to be honest, and stop worrying about, getting the balance right. I do want to mention, like a little aside, the whole balance of, we're on the spectrum of we must be American, our children must succeed and even excel, right, to make all of our sacrifices worthwhile. But on the other hand, we must retain our cultural heritage and our sometimes even religious heritage, especially in the case of those of us that are Jewish. Simply, we could not simply practice what we believe for generations because of the persecution we experienced in the Soviet Union. There's actually at our alma mater, Professor Philip Kassenitz is a presidential professor of sociology. He works at the City University of Graduate Center, and I was fortunate enough to interview him right shortly before the pandemic, which is I think the last time we saw each other. And he even wrote a book about it, Inheriting the City, with some colleagues, where he explores that specific thing, the balance, how we're, on the one hand, we have these conflicting expectations, and it's really hard to resolve them, and we don't even know what they are. And so basically the kids, as parents and also as children of immigrants, we're always picking and choosing the best thing, right? What should we do? But in case of one of the impetuses for the book was reading these tips that I kept seeing, say, in articles. If you want your child to be bilingual, you must always speak your language. You must not give in if they don't speak your language, and you must be firm and reward good behavior or surround them with everything like in that language. Like kids are little, I don't know, kids are little robots or, stuffed animals. And they're obviously, like you said, they have a personality of their own. And in fact, I found so little. So when I was reading all of this, same as other parents I would talk to on the playground or play dates, they would be like, well, I'm trying, and they're resisting. Or if my husband is talking to me or my wife is talking to me in English, how am I supposed to respond differently? So we always hear there is this one way to do it, and you assume, on top of all of your other tasks, right, that if you don't do it this way, then you must be failing somehow. And specifically when it comes to heritage and language, which is such a personal thing for an immigrant, because language is a connection to your heritage, to your ancestors, to some really precious memories, even if some of them may be difficult or painful. But I found that's not the case. There are many ways to be bilingual. Sometimes you have to follow the lead. And when I tried forcing it, I just realized it didn't work. So in fact, with my daughter, my oldest child, I stopped speaking to her in Russian, or like not forcing her, like, you will do this, but I stopped being firm with her when it came to speaking Russian. And she stopped speaking Russian after she went to an American daycare. But then eventually I kind of kept the buzz and the sounds going and the culture surrounding her. And then she started showing interest again. And that's when I came in like, yes, now is my time. And I ended up, teaching her to read and speak Russian, of course, with errors, but she learned to speak and she really loved it. But it's not something wonderful. I could have done by forcing her to do really it.
Wonderful. Yes. So this is actually my favorite thing about your book, that you're not that. You don't prescribe things. You do this or else. You show a variety of approaches from different cultures, not just Russian, and you show how you yourself did certain things, and you show how certain things succeed and certain things fail. And the main idea of this book is that you can't tell in advance what would work or what will not. And for different children, it's a different story. For different parents, for different culture, it's a different story. But I find it very useful to just read this book and maybe try out certain things I'm looking forward to having grandchildren and trying it on them. But also, it allows you not to feel bad if you can't do something, certain things. So it basically encourages you not to force things on kids and be flexible. And as for bilingual component of our lives, I think it's like wonderful that we live in a multilingual country. So it's not too weird for our kids to have a foreign language spoken at home. A lot of people have that. Yeah. We live in this variety of foreign languages, and it's wonderful that the culture of this country is so accepting of our cultures.
I completely agree. And thank you for pointing that out. The whole point for me to in writing this book was not to make it prescriptive, because I don't even necessarily know what I'm doing. I think I wrote this as a parent and as a journalist. But I was really fortunate to be able to speak to experts who study bilingualism, but also, acculturation and sociology and social psychology, and also to the parents who shared what worked for them and what didn't. And the people I spoke to, the vast majority had a very intense attachment to their language. Some of them had children who are fluent, right? You might show them off at like holiday parties, and then they will like recite a song in the language and everybody will clap, but others are not. But it's always it's an ever evolving process, right? Sometimes a child might not want to speak the language or eat the food, or somebody makes fun of their food, and food is like the easiest thing to discuss, right? It's the most accepted, or celebrate certain holidays, but later on they pick it up on their own. Others speak the language all the time. Some switch. Sometimes it's a mom. Sometimes, the mom or one partner speaks one language. The other time it's the other partner that speaks another language. So it's, one parent, one language. Other times it's just one inside the house, one outside of the house, English outside of the house. But there's really no wrong way to do it. It's just what works for you. And
yes,
feeling guilty is so common these days, especially with, with so many responsibilities we have, and the provisions for childcare in this country and parental leave and everything else. And particularly the effect of the pandemic on parents of young children has been very difficult as well. And everybody else, of course, too, but including those who couldn't go to school and still had to have parents who work full time. But at the same time, we're just all doing the best that we can. And this was just the goal to share different experiences.
And this book is so rich with advice and approaches and everything. And at the same time, it lets you think that you're not a failure like a parent. And it's such a relief.
Thank you so much, Lara. That was my goal. I'm really glad to hear your feedback like that, because the last thing I wanted to do was to make it prescriptive. And hopefully it wasn't.
It's wonderful.
Thank you. If I may also, sorry.
I thought, should we open it up for questions or?
Hi, thank you too. That was such a great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have to agree with Lara 1,000%. I remember reading books about parenting when I was, when my children were very, very little, and especially sleeping books. And I remember just wanting to throw those sleeping books against the wall. They were so terrible. But just reading your books the past couple of days, I just felt like I don't know you, but I would love to just have a cup of coffee with you and talk about it, because it's
I would love that. Thank you.
It's great. It is great. And it's just, I really enjoyed it. So thank you for that. And I know we have a couple of questions here. It is not too late to enter and to ask more questions. Looks like we've got 3 here, and let's jump right into it. Okay, let's see. First question is, what part of Russian culture are your children most interested in learning about? I know they're on the younger side now, but what do they ask you about?
Is it maybe we could both, I can take that the question, and Lara, if you want to respond for a different age group.
Exactly. We have children of very different age groups.
Right. So my children are 5 and 8, and what are they're interested in well, definitely food, but they've always been eating like the food that I grew up with, and the daycare providers were always like surprised. Wow, your child eats fish. Like, yes, I mean, it's just fish. Well, that's really weird. Nobody eats fish, or she eats adult food. I'm like, well, I guess, that's kind of what we feed her at home.
Right.
She doesn't throw it back at me most of the time. But what they're interested in, I think they're interested in folklore. They're definitely interested in literature. They're interested in, I'm trying to like expose them to, music, definitely classical music, beyond the Nutcracker. They're interested in, but at the same time, I guess I'm trying to make it more like a universal approach. So it's not just here are the Russian greats, but just music in general. So I try to not necessarily stall and say this is Russian, this is American, but kind of, I guess, make it more homogenous. It's not even something that I necessarily think about, but we definitely make time to read in Russian and watch cartoons and movies in the language. And I tell them about, my life, and they talk to their grandparents. So that's always helpful.
Nice. Laura, how about from an older children's point of view?
So, it's surprisingly the same. My children are almost 20 years older than Masha's. They're 24 and 27.
Wow, I cannot believe it because they were so little when we met.
No, yes, and they love Russian movies, and they love Russian music, especially contemporary Russian music. My son has a close friend in Russia who advises him on contemporary Russian music, something that I wouldn't know because my Russian culture stopped when we left Soviet Union. I mostly know about that. And Russian food. And it was surprising for me, and it made me very happy. My son recently moved to Florida. He works at the space company there. He's an aerospace engineer. And the first thing that at Jacksonville, Florida, where there are not a lot of Russian people, but the first thing that he did was to find a Russian store that sells his favorite Russian foods and his Russian pickles and whatnot. And for some reason, that made me very happy.
Oh, that's amazing. That's wonderful. I'm proud of him too.
And do they want to go to Russia? Do they want you to take them? Are they interested in seeing that country?
I took my kids to Russia once, and it's been an amazing trip because I showed them Russia, but I also showed them my childhood. I went him to all the places, this is my kindergarten, this is my preschool, this is the school where I went to. We walked into my school, and there was a boy who I had a crush on when I was little, and he was now a principal of our school. And it was just so amazing. And I used to tell him a lot of stories about my childhood before that. And then on our trip, I could actually see the places and people, and it's been an amazing experience.
Oh, that's such
and also interesting thing, because Masha's kids are probably too young to answer this question. I once asked my kids, how do we feel? Do we feel fully American, or we feel a little bit Russian? And both of them, independently of each other, said that they feel like they are 50% Russian and 50% American. So I would assume that they feel, because we were born in this country, that feel more American, way more American than Russian. But no, and kind of happy with that.
That is so amazing. By the way, Lara, one of the things that I should have said earlier is I think that you're such a cool mom. And I always thought so, even when we met. And it just sounds like, all of these interests and, cultural identification, it's all thanks to you. And yeah, I bet my music knowledge also stops like circa December 1992. So, but it's amazing that your son continues to maintains, right, as an American-born person, these ties to the contemporary Russian music scene. So it's thanks to your efforts. And your presentation of your heritage. That's really great.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. The next question is, how supportive have your parents been in the way that you're raising your children in the US? Has it changed your relationship? Masha, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. They've been really, recently we moved to live a little bit closer to them, so we can see them more often, but obviously we didn't see each other a lot during the pandemic. They've been obviously an enormous source of support with the upbringing of my children. They don't necessarily babysit, but because they're busy, they're working full time. But they read to them, they speak to them in Russian exclusively. They read some of the from the canon that they grew up with, but also some contemporary children's books. And just, I think it all comes down to the language exposure, like seeking to normalize the language, not be like, oh, well, now this is going to be in your language, but making it a normal part of everyday life. And as the more a person hears a certain language outside of the home, the more it becomes something that's less weird, and just more normal. But they've also been a support for me, even in this book. I didn't actually tell them at first that I left my full-time job to write this book, because I think they'll be a little nervous based on what I knew. So for a few months, I didn't even tell them at all. I think they weren't always pleased with my career choices to begin with, because I'm not a doctor. But ultimately, it's just because, as any immigrant parent, they want the best for their kids, and they don't want the kids to struggle like they did when they moved here. But they've been also an enormous source of support for me as well. Not only have they been really encouraging with this book and my deadlines and the research, but they've also been just like asking me about it, but they've also helped me recall some of the details from the life and the childhood that I had, and just the cultural proclivities, and help me remember those details. And so I'm glad that we're in the space. So they definitely helped with the culture, not just for my children, but for me too.
Oh, that's great. Lara, did you want to add anything? I know you talked a little bit about your mom.
Yes, I talked about this in the beginning. So basically, my mother was very involved in bringing up my kids. I would say she was like a third parent to them. And she died 9 years ago. And I think she would have been very happy with the way they turned out.
Yeah.
Yes.
Great. Let's see. And the last question we have, and there's still time to add more, but we'll get to this one first. Do you think more immigrant parents are preserving culture and language today more so than in previous decades?
That is a really great question. I think at this point, it's just a matter of conjecture for me. There's definitely more opportunity to do so because of technology. Right, we can have FaceTime conversations with somebody in India, right? We can email, we can share videos. There's also, the transnational ties that we have. It's now, a little bit easier to travel back and forth or have the relatives visit, although obviously the pandemic is currently a challenge, and also not everybody can go back to where they're from because of like war, right? Or they don't have the documentation. Sometimes they can't even go to visit an ailing parent, unfortunately, or a family member, because they might not even be able to get back, sadly. But that's a whole other discussion. So yes, in that way, it's easier. But at the same time, the struggle that we have for, say, heritage and language preservation is not that different, I would say, from what it was like 100 years ago, or at the turn of the 20th century, for example, or 19th century, or early 20th century, because there have even been studies that suggest that the language disappears right now at about the same rate as it did 100 years ago and more. It takes about 3 generations, or by the 3rd generation, the heritage language tends to be almost or practically gone. So you got the immigrants that speak it, their kids tend to be bilingual, more or less. And then their children might not have that language at all, typically. Again, there are exceptions, right? Certain communities preserve it more than others. But on average, it's about the same rate. And same as acculturation. It's about the same I think the National Institute of Science and Medicine did a study a couple of years back, and they said that the acculturation happens at about the same rate as it also did 100 years ago. One other thing I'll mention, I've been reading this really fascinating book recently called the Bintal Brief, which is it's like a collection of, it's an advice column from the Jewish Daily Forward newspaper that was started around the time I was mentioning the influx of Eastern European immigrants to the United States. And Jewish immigrants tended to write for personal advice. And I'm reading letters that are like 100 years old saying, my parents speak Yiddish to me, and I'm just really ashamed of it. And I'm embarrassed. I don't want them to do it. I feel like they're doing it to spite me. Why are they doing this to me? What can I do to make them not embarrass me like this in public or when my friends come over? So I think it's a lot of it is just the parent-child relationship when it comes down to it.
Yeah. Lara, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, I agree with everything Masha said. I just wanted to add that I think cultural acceptance changed in the United States now. We are allowed to, I don't know what word to use, to practice our cultures way more than we were before. Like immigrants of a previous generation, they had to hide the cultural differences to fit in better. And now we're allowed to fit in as someone different. So I feel that when the fact that I don't quite fit in is an excellent way to fit in.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, and all the voices, all the people that you talk to in your book, it's kind of that story as well. It's just it just is a reminder that, people, that rich culture that immigrants bring to the United States just makes it so much better. There's just makes it so much richer, a richer tapestry, I think. So I think looks like we've got one more question. Sorry about this. Julie is asking, Masha, from talking to experts and others for this book, did it change any of your viewpoints or plans in how to raise your own children?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Well, definitely the whole notion of insisting that the child speaks my language or celebrates certain, no particular language. Yes, I really relaxed a lot more about it, and I stopped forcing it. And I learned, I think, to be just by learning to be relaxed and not kind of freaking out about making mistakes or doing this and that wrong, allowed me to be more appreciative of what they already do and know. And that in turn influenced them and encouraged them to keep learning more. So in the beginning, when they were, they're still very young, but as I think I mentioned, my daughter rebelled when I wouldn't even call it rebelled, but she refused to speak Russian for a little while. And when my son, he went to actually Chinese language daycare, but when he went to preschool, which was, English majority speaking, when he was just over 3 years old, he started being ashamed of Russian. He'd be like, don't speak Russian to me. Why are you greeting me in Russian? He was very self-conscious. And this happens, I've read even in, with other parents, it's a very universal experience. I've even read a study somewhere where a linguist was saying that he was speaking French to his child and the child would be like, don't speak French to me. And I was like, wow, French is such a beautiful language. Maybe, the child is even embarrassed of speaking French. I would love to speak French to my child. But I also stopped forcing it on him, but I continued the buzz, the kind of the sound of it going in the background to show that it's a positive thing that can enrich their lives without forcing it. So I think just chilling out in that way. And also it made me realize so much about myself, about my own heritage, about, I think, some of the traumas that I've experienced when I came here, because it's so easy to repress it. It's hard to remember. But when I was, talking to other people and reading, for example, there's this really amazing cultural psychologist, John Barry. He wrote about 4 different types of methods of acculturation. Like you can, reject your culture, or you can reject the host culture's ways and kind of where you fit in. And it helped me understand how it was for me. And I think just have a lot more empathy for myself. More than anything, I just really developed so much more empathy for immigrants in general. I realized that I'm way more immigrant than I thought I was. And I think it allowed me to just see so much more in common with those who are from somewhere else than I ever realized that I did before. which I think is, yeah, it's been a really positive experience. If I may also have a question for Lara, if we have a moment too. Okay, so Lara, I guess when you moved here, I have a couple, but I don't know how much time we have. When you moved here and had kids, I guess what was the what were some of the strangest things for you as a Russian raised adult who was raised in Russia? What were some of the cultural things that really surprised you or shocked you when it came to raising yours in America and in New York?
I don't think it was necessarily tied with my being Russian or my being an immigrant. It was just that I was completely unprepared. And I guess my biggest shock was how much responsibility it was and how vulnerable children are. That if you do something without thinking, you can deeply hurt them. And how easy it is to make a mistake. So the best advice I've ever received on parenting was this: no matter what you do, you will make a mistake. And so it was such a relief to hear that. And can I, like the last thing that I do here, I have a suggestion for Masha's next book. If you could just write a book where you would list every single mistake you made as a parent, no advice, nothing like that, just every single mistake, it would be so much fun and so liberating for our parents and so incredibly useful. And I think it just fits your personality, your sense of humor, your warmth, your richness of your experience so well that it would be an excellent book.
Oh, goodness. Thank you so much. I did list a lot of the mistakes that I made in this book as a parent and also just as an individual in some awkward moments. I don't know if I have enough left for a book, just maybe a little listicle. No, I'm kidding. There
Go and make some more.
And I'm afraid I will, but I do just want to kind of off of what you said, Lara, it's such a brilliant point that kids are just so receptive, and one, not just to the mistakes that we make or maybe some slights or the tones of voice that we use, but they're also receptive to how we feel about ourselves and how we feel about our culture and our language. So if they hear certain positive messages that are not like filled with stress or discrimination or negativity, they're a lot more likely to have a very positive, more positive mindset toward it, as opposed to if it's something that's filled with shame or they think they need to be ashamed of it or they're trying to be like forced or coerced into something, whether it's inside the house or outside of the house in popular culture and so on. So it just makes them a lot more receptive and proud if it's a positive environment.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is a perfect note to end on. I want to remind everyone that they can pre-order your wonderful book, Parenting with an Accent. And I really enjoyed this conversation, Lara and Masha. Thank you so much. It's so liberating to get parents together and to say, we are going to make mistakes and it is okay, and embrace it and go with it. And it's going to be a good story down the road. And it's okay I think it's even okay for our kids to see that we make mistakes because it makes us human and it's okay. And we're all going to be fine. So, but books like this, this is the kind of parenting book I wish I had 13 years ago.
Thank you so much, Heidi.
Thank you so much for being here. Take care, both of you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lara.